Hello, I'm Dr. James Holt, and I'm Associate Professor of Religious Education at the University of Chester. And I thought I would just share this brief, who knows how brief it will be, introduction to my new book that was released in October 2024, Understanding Hinduism, A Guide for Teachers. It's published by Bloomsbury. And it's the third publication in a, well, so far, series of three, but there is coming up another three books as well. So we've already had Understanding Sikhism, Understanding Buddhism, and Understanding Hinduism is the new one. We still have Judaism, Islam, and Christianity to go. And if we just look at the contents of this particular book, we begin with the key concepts. We begin with the key beliefs. And then we move on to perhaps the practices and so on, the expressions of belief, the ethical dimension, and so on. And in some ways, this is a debate as to which way around we should do this. So do we begin with beliefs and then look at the outworkings of those within practices and expressions, or do we begin the other way around? And it's the work of this series that we go that way. Now, there's already an issue when you look at the title of the book. You might well begin to think, well, should that be a term that we are using? And is it a helpful term? Because certainly in decolonizing the curriculum, it's perfectly legitimate to say, well, Hinduism is a Western creation, and I will come back onto that in a moment. But is it a term that we should use? Well, I do use it, but I recognize the issues that it comes with. And one of the issues that is suggested on the screen is about its development. So with most of the other larger religious traditions that we explore, we begin with, for example, in Christianity, you begin with Jesus, and then the church develops, and then it develops into different groups. Whereas Hinduism almost works in reverse. It began, that's a word, with lots of different religious traditions, and it wasn't until I'll say the 19th century, but it was late 18th century when the first word Hinduism as a religious concept was first used. But what has happened is that it's developed over time and in construct and in dialogue with British colonialism. And so what I guess has happened is that all of this diverse belief, practice, worldview has been kind of filtered into this structure that it was never meant to go into. And the way that Jonathan Z. Smith describes this is, well, the way I describe what he says is we've tried to push square pegs into round holes, because he suggests that religion is not a native category. It's not a first-person term of self-characterization. It's a category imposed from the outside on some aspect of native culture. It is the other, in these instances, colonialists who are solely responsible for the content of this term. So why do I use it? Well, throughout the book, I use voices of Hindus, Hindus in Britain. And so there are issues with it. So Hinduism is a unifying and academic term to describe the major faith rooted in the Indian subcontinent. So maybe that's why. But then there's other people who suggest that dharma is the best term and it's always existed, therefore it's Santana. Hindu is what others call us and therefore not preferred. So why do I use that term? Well, again, looking at this, it was an appellation that was given to people who live near the River Indus, first of all, but then it was trying to understand the people who they now ruled, basically said, and you all look similar, you all do similar things. So trying to understand your religion through a Christian lens, you are all Hindu. I often use the example of perhaps coming to Britain at 3 o'clock, seeing everybody wearing scarves, going to watch people kick a ball around and saying, well, you're all Manchester United fans. I think I would be rather horrified at that fact. So it is problematic. But it has developed over time. So Chakravorty, this is a really interesting book. He suggests that while at its inception the term held little meaning beyond what was being suggested by the British, today its meaning is much clearer. And he said, similarly, whether Hindu was invented or not, whether it's a convenient category or container created to hold a very diverse population with a great variety of self-identities, it's a social reality now. Hinduism may not have existed in 1800, but it does now, and because of that, it's possible to call oneself Hindu. But again, there's also been a bit of a reciprocal relationship between, I guess, the colonizer and the colonized. So Ramila Thapar, she describes syndicated Hinduism, and the book kind of explores this, which is the idea that this diversity was kind of lumped together, and but it still had that diversity. So the last line of the first part here, it says, this was when it was kind of anything from atheism to animism could legitimately be regarded as Hinduism. But there seems to have become a move toward syndicated Hinduism. And for example, Prime Minister Modi, in suggesting what Diwali is about, suggests very much that it's about the story of Rama and Sita and the Ramayana. But that misses all of the diversity that kind of exists. And so, again, Ramila Thapar suggests that today the Hindus of the Parishads and the Sanghs Hinduism would look upon atheists and animists with suspicion and contempt, for the term Hinduism is being used in a different sense. So this is the idea that in some ways there is beginning to become a consolidation, and that richness and diversity is disappearing. So it's an interesting discussion, and the book tries to capture the diversity that we find within the Hindu community throughout the world. But its roots and its definition and all of those things is really difficult. And as part of this definition of Hinduism, history is really, really important. And one of the challenges that the classroom teacher faces, and we kind of explore, is, well, the Hinduism of today, whatever we mean by that, is very different. And Hinduism is often described as the world's oldest religion. And that's true, but in the sense that it has gone through various incarnations. And so we look here, and there's the first epoch, which is the pre-Vedic period. The second epoch, the Vedic period, where the Vedas were composed and written. The third epoch, the ascetic reform period. So this is where you may see Nastika groups such as Jain and Buddhism begin, which are now perhaps seen to be, well, definitely seen to be separate. And the fourth epoch, classical Hinduism. Fifth epoch, the sects of Hinduism kind of develop. And then modern Hinduism is the sixth. And so yes, they are developmental and they are inherited of what has come before, absolutely. And there is a contiguous nature of what Hinduism is. But to think that people today believe the same things that were perhaps in the pre-Vedic period doesn't quite capture the richness and the interplay and everything else. And so it's important to explore those things. Now, in having discussed the diversity that is Hinduism, this raises the issue of, well, what do we teach? Because in a teaching of religion and worldviews today, there is very much a diversity, and there is no such thing almost as an institutional Hindu worldview. But there are things, I guess, looking at essentialism, and Jackson and Killingley suggest, although Hinduism may not have a universally accepted core, it does have a family of distinctive concepts and social structures, and it also has tendencies and practices and beliefs. So I think whenever we teach, and I talk about this all the time in lots of different books, is the messiness of religion. We recognize it with many, most, and some, and recognizing that there is just not one way to be Hindu. I mean, it goes for any other religion. But one of the key things is to perhaps utilize an ethnographic approach where we look at what Hindus think. And so you look on the screen, and there's different things there that we can talk about. And these are what Hindus have described their religion as. And it focuses very much on the idea of dharma. Now, dharma, and we explore this in much greater detail, it kind of lies at the heart. And to try and translate dharma is almost impossible. Dharma comes, as it suggests, from the Sanskrit root dri, which means to sustain, or that which is integral to something. So the dharma of fire is to be hot, the dharma of sugar is to be sweet. In some ways, humans are the only creation that have a choice about whether to follow that dharma. So we do have to kind of look at those things. But this lies really in the book, explores dharma before anything else, because it is, and it's a complete way of life. There's no religious aspects and then some secular aspects or temporal aspects, whatever we want to describe it. It's very much about, well, this lies at the heart of what it is to be within Hinduism. And there's different types. There's religious rights, there's duties, there's justice, there's moral virtues. There's varna specific duties, which we'll come back to in a moment, and whether they are the ashrama specific duties. Then there's duties particular to certain groups. And Sri Dharma, for example, is the dharma of women. Now, that's fairly problematic, I think, today, and perhaps has been developed in much greater detail. But originally, for example, the dharma of a woman was to be a daughter, to be a wife, and to be a mother. And so the idea is that her dharma was in relation, if you like, to others or to men. So we do have to kind of explore that and look at the development of that over time. One of the most controversial aspects of teaching Hinduism is the idea of caste and varna, ashrama, dharma. So this is the idea that society has been structured into varnas, and there's the writings and the laws of Manu that suggest the Brahmins came from the head, the Kshatriyas the arms, the Vaishyas I think from the thighs, and the Shudras the feet. So you have all of those things that are going on, and then there's untouchability as well. So is this a Hindu concept? Well, many Hindus would say absolutely not. But when we look through, for example, history and so on, we see that it was used within a religious context, but it wasn't about birth. It was about what is best suited to your capabilities. And there was very much a fluidity between those various varnas. But in some ways, the British kind of concretized it, or over time it actually became concretized, because this is just the nature, and this is an incredibly interesting sociological perspective, is how you look at that and think, well, how did that become concretized within society? And so today, the concept of caste, which is obviously a British word, but the concept of varnas is beginning to dissipate. And this is what some people have said. It says the caste system was originally thought about as being part of a profession. Over time, it turned into more a birth-based system, which is now used as a weapon to discriminate. Ideally, discrimination based on caste should be abolished, and the purpose of caste itself needs to be questioned. All human beings are created equal, so why should there be a caste system? And then so on, the caste system is unnecessary. So much more over the course of history, and certainly within society today, and it may be considered a cultural expression today, caste really isn't a thing. But because it survives in almost the zeitgeist, we have to be prepared as teachers to address the issues. And so the book kind of explores a little bit around it. And then we also have the concept of I'll use the term God within Hinduism, but again, using that term is difficult. Brahman may be more correctly described as one of the three features of the divine. This is the idea that there is a Brahman, an ultimate spirit, if you like, an ultimate being, don't even know if that's the right phraseology, who is known through different manifestations, and we'll come on to that in a moment. But there is the idea that Brahman is everywhere, and this entire army within or within the heart, Bhagwan outside and beyond. So most traditions within Hinduism will explore some aspect, if not all aspects, of the divine in this way. But as Rasmandala Das suggests, they're understood in different ways and different emphases are given. So what does it mean, entire army? It's a concept within Hinduism that the divine is within the heart. So the Bhagavad Gita suggests that the Supreme Lord dwells in the hearts of all living beings. So it's very much an idea that can be explored, but sometimes it's missed within our presentation of the divine within schools. Similarly, Bhagwan is often translated as Lord or the adorable one. Sometimes it's used interchangeably with God. And I kind of have an issue with using God as a Hindu term, but it's almost become the shorthand. So divine, absolute, supreme, I don't know really the language that we should use, but we should try and use it in a way that it doesn't conjure up images of the God of classical theism, if you like. So the question is, and oftentimes we suggest this, is that we make our approach to God and the divine very simplistic within Hinduism. Brahman is known in many different forms, whether that's Vishnu, Shiva, and so on. But actually, a Vaishnavite or a follower of Vishnu, a Shaivite who is a follower of Shiva or a follower of Shakti, would believe that the supreme being, if you like, that person, that being who is without time or outside of time and is supreme, would be variously Shiva, Vishnu, Shakti, and Krishna. But sometimes we kind of try and just kind of make a concept easy to understand when that complexity is actually mentioned. And one of the ways that we do that is by suggesting the Trimurti, which are the three, we'll use the term main deities of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. But this is a problem, and Narayanan suggests that first it suggests that Hindus give equal importance to all three gods, when in practice most focus their devotions on a single supreme deity, whether Shiva, Vishnu, the goddess, or a local deity who may be unknown in other parts of India, and consider the other deities secondary. Furthermore, Brahma is not worshipped as a supreme deity. Though portrayed in mythology as the creator god, he is only the agent of the supreme deity who created him. That deity at whose pleasure Brahma creates. The universe may be Vishnu, Shiva, or the goddess, depending on the worshipper's sect. And this is really key because we can present this, and obviously there are some Hindus who do believe in many gods, but the suggestion of the polytheistic interpretation of the Trimurti suggests that creation, preservation, and destruction are functions that can be performed separately. But in fact, these functions are three parts of an integrated even process for which one particular supreme god is responsible. In this context, destruction is not unplanned, nor is it final. It's simply one phase in the ongoing evolution and devolution of the universe. The cycle of creation will continue as long as there are souls caught up in the wheel of life. It's in this sense that devotees of Shiva, Vishnu, or the goddess see their chosen deity as the creator, maintainer, and destroyer of the universe. So, yes, we mention the Trimurti. Yes, we talk about this, but at the same time, we have to recognize that it's only one presentation and doesn't really reflect the practice and beliefs of Hindus. So there's many different interpretations. So Brahma we see as the creator, Vishnu as the preserver, but Vishnu, as suggested, could be seen to be supreme, and he is seen through avatars, such as those that we can see on the screen, whether that's Matsaya, Narasimha, Krishna, Rama, and so on. And then Shiva, who again is seen as supreme, is often seen as Yogi, Nataraj, Lingam. And so we have different approaches and different manifestations, and we just have to represent, if you like, this diversity. And absolutely, I think today we need to talk about Shakti, the divine feminine, because there are so many ways that we can see this within Hinduism, and is particularly an interesting aspect to explore. And this is something, again, all of these different manifestations are focused on, or each of these different supreme beings are focused on within the book as well. So this is from Savitri by Aurobindo. For one was there supreme behind the god, a mother might brooded upon the world. A consciousness revealed its marvelous front, transcending all that it is, and then carrying on. The mother of all godheads and all strength, who mediatrix binds earth to the supreme. And there are many different manifestations of Shakti. And again, there's a debate within Hinduism whether the goddesses, I'll use that phrase for want of a better one, are manifestations of Shakti, or if they have independent existence. And there's all that we need to explore. I also explore a little bit about the different scriptures, the Shruti and the Smriti, and how those are interpreted. And we look, for example, at the Vedas and how they are used today. But by and large, the epochs, and there's lots of other ways of describing these books, as Ras Mandala suggests, for popular purposes in the UK, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the Puranas, and the Bhagavad Gita are most commonly used within Hindu traditions. And so we should use those books in exploring. But again, when we're exploring them in the classroom, there are traditional narratives, and we can look at those and the traditional interpretations of such. But also we need to recognize perhaps things that go outside of our ordinary experience. And so, for example, when we look at Sita within the Ramayana, if we look at even Valmiki's Ramayana, there is so much more following Rama and Sita's return to Ayodhya. And so there's so much that kind of goes along where we need to listen to the divine feminine or the feminine voice within Hinduism. So we look at things like different books, different novels. So The Forest of Enchantments by Divakaruni is just amazing, as are all, and they're told from a feminine perspective. And when we read of what's the word? When we read of Sita's taking back into the earth, Rama is asking Sita to prove her virtue again. So not just walking through the fire, which happened much earlier. She's had children. She's in a hermitage. Rama is regretting having sent her into the forest, and whatever reason. So he asks her to prove her virtue again. And then she says, "O King of Ayodhya, you know I'm innocent, and yet unfairly you're asking me to step into the fire. You offer me a tempting prize indeed, to live in happiness with you and my children. But I must refuse, because if I do what you demand, society will use my action forever after to judge other women, even when they aren't guilty. The burden of proving their innocence will fall on them, and society will say, why not? Even Queen Sita went through it. I can't do that to them. And that is why, O King Ram, I must reject your kind offer to allow me to prove my innocence again, because this is one of those moments when a woman must stand up and say, no more." It's hard not to read this passage without seeing an underlying condemnation of a society and history that has perhaps used Sita in this way. This retelling places her in the seat of power to stand up for herself and all women. So there's a great opportunity to use these stories to kind of explore modern issues as well as perhaps those. So we will look, for example, at issues of trans rights, because there are beings or characters within, I think it's the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, of people who are different genders and are gender fluid, and so we can begin to explore all of those. There's lots of different things that I also explore, so things like the cycle of samsara, and looking at, because oftentimes we look just at karma yoga, the way of achieving moksha, which is the law of cause and effect. And we can often use, and I do suggest the use of moksha chitram or snakes and ladders as a classroom activity to kind of teach that. But then there's other forms such as jhana yoga or spiritual knowledge, raja yoga, meditation, and then bhakti yoga, which is devotion to a deity. So you have all of these different approaches, which I think sometimes are overlooked in schools and the way that we present Hinduism to students. Also exploring things like darshan, and the importance of seeing and being seen between the deity and the divine, and so what that means. So there's all kinds of things that we explore in terms of worship, in terms of the different aspects. And then we look at authority and diversity within Hinduism within the UK, especially, and there's different traditions. For example, there's you will come across Swaminarayan, but even within Swaminarayan, there's Swaminarayan and Bapps Swaminarayan. There are different traditions. There's umbrella groups as well, as you can see here: the National Council of Hindu Temples, Hindu Council UK, Hindu Forum of Britain, Insight UK. So who has the right to speak on behalf of Hindus? And that's a really interesting question for a faith that has almost been constructed out of tons of diversity. And this is shown in the use of mandirs. So there's an image here, and I always find this quite interesting because this is my local mandir in Manchester, but it's proudly described as a Hindu temple, and I would always avoid using, if you like, Christian or Western terminology. So I would much prefer and talk about in the book the use of Hindu mandir instead of temple, but it also draws on different types. So Tomalin and Singh reported on different Hindu mandirs which were universal and open for all Hindus. So, for example, the Gita Bhagwan temple, or mandir, excuse me, talk about or have images of Shiv, they have images of Rama, they have images of Ganesh, they have images of even Guru Nanak within that as well. So regional, Sampradaya, which is sectarian, so you may find, for example, Swami Narayan is an example of those, Guru or Swami-led, caste-focused, ashrams and independence. So it's all of those different types. Some of them are purpose-built, some of them are home conversions, some of them are rented. They serve as places of worship, but they also serve as places where community activities. And we can look at the bottom, and it kind of talks about the importance of them for Hindus. So one Hindu suggests temple helps bring peace to the mind and redirects you to life's purpose. The word man means mind and dir means peace. It's a focal point for the community, and it gives a great sense of peace, community and happiness. So this has been a whistle-stop tour so far of things that I cover in the book. One of them is also to do with the challenges that are faced and how we can address them. And interestingly, this is one of the reasons why I'm writing these books, is for teacher confidence. And Insight UK finds that this is a report that reports the opinions of Hindus. 98% of survey respondents said the study of Hinduism in RE is of low quality and deficient. 75% is not taught in a positive light. 86% they're either dissatisfied or very. 76% of primary school parents are unhappy. 81% of Key Stage 3 parents are discontent about subject knowledge. There's a growing evidence of inaccurate resources used by classroom teachers. And Charlotte Littlewood suggests one experience of a parent, of a teacher who tells a child, you don't know about your own religion. You have so many gods. Your religion is idol worship, even though they were corrected to say deity worship, and they continue to insist that it's the same. When teachers say that these things, they undermine the students and make a mockery of them. And I wish I could say that this is not my experience, but I remember as a head of department, I created lots of different resources that would teach Hinduism to, at the time it was year 7. And one of the teachers came to me and said, oh, James, I had a wonderful lesson today. Teaching Hinduism, very unconfident. He was a DT teacher, but had been asked to teach it. And he said, yeah, what we did is I drew a white rabbit on the board and we began to talk about superstition. And it's just like, oh my goodness, what are you doing? Why does this attitude prevail? And so it's about making sure that that which is said is accurate. And that's why the diversity and the many most and some is so key. Because we need to recognize the diversity, but the most important examples that we use in the classroom are those from our local area. The diversity of the Hindu experience in the UK is significant and should find expression in our classrooms. Unfortunately, this has not always been the case, and I close the book by saying, Hinduism is a religion that transforms the individual as they understand the nature of existence. Sometimes in our writing and teaching, we forget that everything in Hinduism has its root in this teaching. Nothing in the Hindu worldview makes sense without an understanding of dharma, the nature of the divine and the purpose of existence. It's my hope that as we explore Hinduism as a lived religion, it will become more than a list of observable phenomena, but that it will reflect the reality of Hindu life. It is only then that the richness and diversity of Hinduism can be understood by those we teach. As always, please feel free to reach out to me either at the university or on Twitter or Facebook or TikTok. I'm very happy to answer questions and help as best that I can. I do hope to do a much longer video about Hinduism and about how we teach it in future, but this is about a half-hour introduction. So thank you for taking your time to listen.